include social demographic features such as socioeconomic class, gender, years of schooling, occupation, and many
Just an
others.
external.
Okay? And we saw that variation is systematic and not random. We saw that social groups vary in their use of variance in relation to these multiple factors conditioning their speech. Today we are going to look at one special case of variation that is called style shift. So, Labov was a pioneer in discovering that not only social groups vary in the frequency of use of some variants, but also these kinds of variation can be found in the speech of individuals. So style shift is a very useful concept to understand intra-speaker variation as well as inter-speaker variation. What is intra-speaker variation? Okay.
Can you speak up? We're not able to hear a word you said.
Intra-speaker variation is a variation between the speech of one person.
Okay.
And intra-speaker variation is variation in relation to social group, and the same between speakers. So Labov was a pioneer in carrying out studies to observe how speakers vary in their choice of variant in relation to some situational factors. For example, the task that they were performing. So consider different tasks. For example, reading the affairs. Reading paragraphs and summaries. So, in one of his studies, he asked participants to engage in different tasks. First, to read a list of minimal pairs, then to read a short paragraph, and then he observed the same research subject as they engaged in conversation with neighbors or members of the household. And guess what he found? The same thing that social linguists found throughout their studies. Heterogeneity, diversity, fluctuations, alternations between the use of different variants. And he said, this is interesting. Now, how can we explain variation within the speech of an individual in relation to the task they perform? And the first explanation that emerged was that these different tasks involve different degrees of attention to the act of speaking. You agree? When you are reading minimal pairs, speakers pay more attention to the act of speaking than when they engage in conversation. Therefore, he found that the more attention speakers pay to the act of speaking, the more frequent certain variants become. And here we need to think about which are these variants that are more frequently produced when speakers pay more attention to their speech. Okay, not necessarily standard variants, but enjoy prestige within the speech community. That is to say, the more attention, and of course, I agree with you. Anna? No, Naya. I definitely agree with you that in most speech communities, standard variants enjoy prestige. That's right, and more social. Generously, and that's right. So, the more attention speakers pay to their speech, the more frequent they choose prestigious forms. Notice that I'm not being categorical, this is just a tendency. And this tendency is revealing because it can be observed not just in the speech of an individual, but this kind of variation is systematic across social groups. So if you observe speakers belonging to a particular class, let's say a middle class, you will see that the behavior of a member of that class in relation to style shifting follows the same pattern. That is to say, the members of a social group behave alike in relation to style shifting. But of course, style shifting is not only conditioned by the past, but also by other situational factors, for example, the topic. Topic or what is it that they are talking about? What do you think? If we compare speaking, talking about the supernatural forces that they cannot explain, and language use in society, which topic is more likely to elicit greater attention to their speech? Which one is more difficult? I don't know. But depending on who is speaking, right? To me, so it's not really a matter of difficulty, but it's kind of expectations. Expectations that speakers share. If a research subject is talking about language issues with a researcher who is an expert in language, that aspect of the social situation will condition the speech of an individual to monitor their speech more likely than if they are talking about superstitious stuff. Notice that these are multiple factors that condition speech variation in an individual in systematic ways. More interesting, we can think about the audience. Remember last class, Dr. Karen said, okay, the concept of audience is going to be applied in Unit 4 too. How? Or let's put it in this way. If we consider the audience, and let's say the audience, let's start with the audience. The concept of audience is a complex one and can be broken into smaller concepts. So if I am talking to Nayara, Nayara is my audience is like a general term, but she's the person that this is my whole audience, but Nayara is just a special member of the audience. The person that the speaker is talking to. Yeah, addressing.
That's Marcella's part.
Okay. Okay, then we're going to think about the concept of audience, but it is important to see that speakers style shift in relation to the members of the audience, how they are perceived, not who they are. Because sometimes, I mean actually most of the time, speakers interact with unknown people, but yet the
let me point out that there have been criticisms in relation to the explanation initially offered that involved attention to speech, attention to one's own speech. The initial, what seems to be the initial assumption by Labov is that more attention to speech is connected to standard variance. But that is not the case necessarily. So there can be cases in which speakers pay more attention to speech, and that does not necessarily lead to increasing the frequency of use of the standard variant of the narrative. So, in fact, what we could pay attention to in style shifting is the actual nature of the task of reading out loud pairs of words or isolated words or isolated paragraphs, those tasks that Labov asked the research subjects to carry out. We could actually consider what association, or what are the associations that speakers tend to establish with the actual activity of reading out loud. That is not an activity that, or that's not something that speakers acquire naturally. You learn to read, and you learn to read out loud in the process of, or while you are becoming literate in formal instruction, or through formal instruction, I should say, in educational institutions. So there are a number of ideas that are associated with reading out. So there isn't the greater attention to speech or the less attention to speech doesn't seem to be a very adequate explanation for why speakers increase usually the use of their use of standard variants of variables while they are reading out loud. Consider yourself reading something out loud. You even utter words at a different pace. So attention to speech was challenged heavily. And eventually Labov's methods, or his methodology to collect data and having speakers do these different tasks was also challenged on the basis that that methodology was not good enough to compare different communities, because in some communities there may be illiterate people that cannot carry out some tasks. And the reading of isolated words and the reading of paragraphs involves comparing that sort of production with something that is totally different, which is natural discourse that is produced while people are doing socializing, just having a conversation with their family, members of their family, or having a conversation on the phone, or interacting with a sales assistant, for example. So the results of what he obtained from these different tasks was considered by some authors to be not comparable.
I hope everybody has taken careful note of this explanation. Every word in it is crucial. Then, if attention to speech is not a respected concept today, 45 years after it was applied, actually 60 years after it was applied, why on earth is it in the reading materials? We can skip it altogether. However, notice that a serious, responsible textbook writer like Miriam Meyerhoff, chosen by a serious, responsible teaching team who don't just pick up any textbook just because it's published in the Northern Hemisphere. Why is it that it's still kept? Notice that it is in between inverted commas. And for non-native speakers like you, it represents a big risk, because you read attention and you think that production of consonants and height of diphthongs is conscious and deliberate all the time. Therefore, what we know now is that we are closer to describing reality if we concentrate on style shift. And this has nothing to do with an individual's ability to manipulate their phonology. What we know now, particularly because social linguistics is a huge field, and every researcher reads other social linguists' findings, and there is no chasm between the first semester and the second semester of linguistics too. And macro social linguists are speaking about discourse today, and they have always talked about addressees and interlocutors because of the progress in what you learned in Unit 1, the concept of activity. For decades, macro social linguists have known that the activity of reading is not comparable to the activity of having an interview, and it's not comparable to the activity of having a conversation. We already know the differences between conversation and interview because you have studied the different rights and obligations. And you have studied turn-taking. So these guys can be macro-social linguists, but they are not silly. They use the concept turn-taking in their studies. Therefore, and in the same way, the reverse is the case, interactionalists use the findings from macro social linguistics, the social linguistics that studies huge cities like Buenos Aires, San Juan de Puerto Rico, Madrid, New York, Chicago. But macro social linguists have also studied tiny towns. And they have also studied small communities, very small communities, like first year of the School of Language. And they've studied macro social linguists, have studied even smaller groups, like groups of friends, groups of colleagues, and high school gangs. Therefore, there aren't two different planets, the first semester and second semester. And in addition to that, people still, like Mira and Meyerhoff, pay tribute to how knowledge was gained. And they pay tribute to people who worked in the 60s and in the 70s. That's why we still say, inverted commas, attention to speech. But actually it's not conscious, and it's not attention. And it's not speech. Because they were looking at one vowel. And there's another problem. The categories invented to observe what was called attention and now we call style shift. The differences between careful and casual, that is so tenuous. And to make matters even worse, during the same encounter, during the same face-to-face interaction, during the same interview, the same interviewee, when asked about straightforward topics such as what's your address, who lives next door, how many brothers and sisters do you have? A certain articulation of vowels and consonants was observed. But then, 45 minutes later, when interviewer and interviewee were going through more personal topics, and the question was, in your view, what is happiness? displayed features that were different from those displayed during the initial stage of the interview. And there are topics about which people hesitate and people are more meticulous in their answer. For example, do you feel that yellow or the death of people you love? Then there was a shift in style, and there still is. What would you call that? Variation according to social class? Of course not. That was variation influenced by topic. Okay, that's the story of the late difunta attention to speech.
Stylistic variation as a phenomenon is very interesting for social linguists because we are going to make connections between this phenomenon and the variation in general, but also in relation to language change, because we are going to see how the preference for some special social group of a higher frequency of use of certain speech forms in the formal speech style may influence language change. It is coming.
So it can be said that linguistic factors and social demographic factors, but also stylistic factors influence speech. Style is a factor.
Your question is style a factor?
Yes.
Well, style is what varies in relation to some factors. So style, let's say, is the dependent variable.
Good answer.
And of course, in the reading material, you will read about styles such as formal style, informal style, casual style. You can think about them as not, well-defined, kind of a continuum, right? And you can see how speakers, in relation to the activity at hand, will shift from, let's say, formal to informal as the activity changes.
And they actually don't shift from formal to informal, as you said, because they are not closed compartments. They adjust the relative frequency of some variance of certain variables.
That's key. So style shifting is really a matter of different frequencies of use of certain forms. But now you have the second concept, variance.
What Dr. Galina has just said is so important that it should make you think. That it is wrong to say people vary. It's the frequency that varies. And to say people speak differently, will you please leave WhatsApp for a minute? Thank you. People speak or people's speech depends on the context. That is wrong, an overgeneralization, and probably a truism. Something that is too obvious, like, oh, cars and vehicles in general can move. Therefore, what you see is adjustments of frequencies and we don't use umbrella terms that are meaningless.
Okay, so as Dr. Galanzo said before, we have already seen in the unit about interaction how the audience, how the person we are addressing is an influence on the speech of the speaker, right? So that is what some social linguists have proposed, and it's called audience design. So some critics of this first start to say that speakers vary in their use of different variants. They vary their style according to their views, depending on who they are talking to. And Adam Bell came up with a differentiation of kinds of audiences. He described who has a greater impact on the speech of the speaker, depending on a couple of factors. So the first one we can say is, we are going to put here kinds of audience. So we have a speaker, and then I'm going to tell you a nice example for you to try to identify them. Okay? So we have the addressee. This is the person the speaker is directly addressing, right? Then we have auditor. Then we have the overhearer. And then we have another that is called eavesdropper. So, speakers were found to attune their speech to the characteristics of the social groups or the individuals they were addressing the most. So they attuned the most to these. Second, to the auditors, and not so much to these other two. Now, what's the difference between all of them? So, the addressee is known to be there. It's ratified. And the addressee is, of course, being addressed directly. Now, the auditor is known to be there, is ratified, but this person is not being addressed. The overhearer is a person.
Do you all guys understand what to address mean? How do you translate address into Spanish? Dirigirse? Okay.
The overhearer.
So.
Sorry.
And the translation for addressee,
Okay.
everybody, the translation for addressee, a kind of receptor. What kind? For example, I say,
Can you speak?
Pierina has translated addressee with a hyperonym. She said it's receiver, receptor, but you need an equivalent, not a word that includes addressee. So, destinatario. Destinatario. Destinatario is a category of receivers. That's why when I say hello, Pirina, you all are receivers, but there's only one addressee. This was studied in Unit 1 because addressing is a key for turn assignment. So, how would you translate addressing? Destinación. But that's only extremely sophisticated, I would say.
Okay, so as you see, this explanation pertains to the speaker's attunement. So this is a good one to remember, attunement. The shifting that the speaker unconsciously does depending on who they are addressing and who they know is also hearing, listening, right? And this happens to all of us. For example, right now, I, as a speaker, I am attuning my speech to you, students of 5th year School of Languages, Faculty of Languages. When I speak to students in secondary school, do you think that I use the same kind of variants and lexical
Yes, you do.
choices? Well, some. But here, I also have somebody else that is very important for me. I have auditors, right? Who are not being addressed directly, but who I know are there, and I ratify that they are there, right? And there might be some overhearers if the door is open and they come and they listen to me. Those are the overhearers, and I know that they may come. They may be students. Eavesdroppers are people that I am not aware if they are there or not, if they know me or not. So we are all under, not the pressure, but we are all influenced by all of them when we speak. All of us. Whenever we go to work, to study, whenever we talk to our boss, or when we talk to our family. And I will give an example for you to laugh a little. So, Sunday afternoon, Child's Day, right? So, picture the scene. My house, my children, in-laws. So my child would be misbehaved. So I'm talking to my child, right? So who's my child?
The addressee.
Yes, he's my addressee. So I'm adjusting to the 4-year-old. I'm using specific lexical terms I use with my child. But then, my in-laws are there, listening to all I'm saying to my beautiful child on Child's Day. Who are they? They are there. And then I have an aunt washing the dishes, who's also commenting from the back. Who is that one? Yes, I know she's there washing the dishes, and I know she has something to say. Okay, so we are all influenced by all of these, right? Even when we are working, we are, and it's important to make you conscious. For example, I give you another example. I had the opportunity to work in a company that welcomed immigrants to Canada, right? So in this company, they were very strict as to the way we should talk to these immigrants. these protocols that I had to study, similar to those manuals we saw. And I sometimes had to speak to them in Spanish if they came from Latin America, or in English if they came from all other parts of the world. Now, sometimes this was happening in a school, in an office that had open doors, and these people were mostly teenagers that came to Canada alone. Others came with a mom, an older brother. So whenever they sat in front of me and I was explaining these things to them, they were my addressees, right? But if they came with an older brother or mother, I had to bear in mind that my speech was being monitored by somebody else, the auditors. But this was happening in the school, so the school was full of people. Most of the time, the secretary, who was sitting outside, would also comment. Hey, look what you said over here. And then I noticed that there were some eavesdroppers, but this was after I left. The one next door in the next office was also listening to whatever I was saying. So you see, I was aware of this. And because I was aware of this, I had to attune my speech. I had to really think what I was going to say, how. It was not a relaxed conversation, no. And it was completely different when this happened in another scenario with the doors closed and when I already knew the addressee from a long time and there were no auditors. My speech, I noticed, changed completely. Even in Spanish, that is...
Bueno, tanto como completely.
A lot, Isolda, because in Spanish, for example, in my case, it was so hard for me to address the addressee as usted. I was expected to be like, these were teenagers. So it was an effort
Yeah.
on my
But
part.
that's not completely, because you are implying that your phonology changed too. And the only thing you could calibrate, tune into, was address terms.
Okay. And I also had...
That is, your grammar in Spanish still had subject and predicate.
But I had another problem with the grammar in Spanish. I was expected to use the neutro, tú. And for me, the balls came out. So whenever I was not being I was not with an auditor, I would style shift to my beautiful boss. Because that's what we do with style shift.
Exactly. Now, you were made to use a certain second person singular pronoun by the requirements of the job.
Yes.
What social linguists study is people's natural behavior. For example, when you step out of the metro into the Bronx or Queens, with 90% of Latinos coming from Honduras, Puerto Rico, El Salvador. Well, El Salvador wouldn't be a good example. Venezuela. Lots of people from the Caribbean and Central America. Your speech will be calibrated to the population your addressees come from. Because human beings' goal is to be understood. not so much to understand, but that's another story. To be understood. So, naturally, without a boss giving an order, you wouldn't dream of saying, "Cacho el bondi y estoy en 5 minutos." You wouldn't say cacho, you wouldn't say el bondi, and you start saying, "Tomé el bus." Because you want to get your message across. And what happens if you stay in Queens for many years and you don't cohabitate with a Cordobese who drinks mate in class, but with a very handsome Colombian guy who plays vallenato all day long. You know what? Your inventory of lexical items, even your phonology, gets adapted. And that happens to all the people coming from different countries, but sharing the same linguistic system, Spanish. So instead of retaining their all the features of their original dialect, their idiolect becomes more similar and more similar and more similar to everybody else. And you may say, it cannot be similar to everybody else because everybody else comes from 15 different countries with 15 different dialects. So what is that? That is el emparejamiento. That is called leveling. Dialect leveling. Al final, terminas hablando de tú. Now, if you have a different boyfriend from Spain, you stop saying dos because he hears dos. Dos. He hears dos. So you start saying peninsular Spanish Italian. Say 12. Doce. Otherwise, you come at noon and he waits for you at 2 p.m. You see that when you want to be understood, you make the effort to pick up the features, either grammatical or phonological, that would favor your goal. And Cordobeses who have never taken macro-social linguistics, Unit 5, Unit 4 in Linguistics 2. Right here at Plaza San Martin, when they find foreigners and they give directions, all of a sudden, Cordobeses are speaking with two. You see the pressure of that has a name that is called accommodation. linguists from Unit 1, linguists from Unit 3, and linguists from Unit 4. What do they do in order to find out, to understand stuff about language use, not about language in the system, language use? They don't ask questions, and they don't give orders. They observe. They notice. That's how you notice. Argentinians saying, a las 12, te espero. Al mediodía, hombre. Because social linguists don't ask questions about use. We do not ask this beautiful woman, notice, woman, not a girl, okay? Your name?
Valentina Rosa.
We don't ask Valentina. Pierina. Pierina, Valentina. I'm confused. We don't ask Valentina. Valentina, what do you say? Pieza, mi habitación o mi cuarto? Mi pieza, mi habitación, mi cuarto. We simply ask Valentina, where were you born? Where were you born? That's all we ask. But we never ask questions about use. We simply follow her and listen to her. And I can predict what she says, what she chooses. She has 3 variants, 3 lexical variants. This is crucial because you studied this in Unit 3. We don't go and ask people, are you a racist? People always have good opinion of themselves. So we don't ask people, do you say yo or sure? Never. We never ask questions about language use. Ah, no, yo uso la africativa sonora, voiced African. Yo. No uso la sorda, yo. No uso la semival, yo. Yeah, sure. Ajá. Cree lo que quieras. But I'm gonna record you and see. My point is, one thing is what people think they do, and a very different thing is people's behavior. We must observe conduct. Okay. This same schema is on page 48 of the materials. You are there, 48. You are there, there. You're already there.
must have a question.
Therefore, Professor Altamira, when people have same thing you write on the blackboard, ask them to open the reading materials and to bring the reading materials in class so that you use the blackboard for things that they do not have. Yes, your question. Listen, guys, this man is saying, how can you make the interviewee self-conscious and reflexively control their own speech? I'll tell you how. You interview someone and you say, I'm a linguist and I'm a language teacher too, and I'm a doctor. Now, what's your opinion of Cordova's dialect? Obviously, the interviewee will try to please you and to satisfy your standards. And the interviewee will answer, I say, me llama la lluvia a la calle. Because the interviewee will think maybe that is what is expected, because language teachers are concerned with what is right and what is wrong. So what you do, you ask something. You do not introduce all your credentials. And you ask something different. For example, hey, I'm not from this neighborhood and I'm looking for a bus to go downtown. Can you give me directions? Can you give me directions? What bus takes me downtown? So, the interviewee will be focusing on bus number, walking to the east or towards the west, and what are you gonna pay attention to? Whether the interviewee is saying para allá or para allá. That is not being dishonest, because you actually need it to get back home. And you are picking up the dialect of the northeast of Córdoba, and you have no idea what bus to take to go back downtown. So it's a genuine, authentic, sincere question. But you are a lover of phonetics and phonology, so you pay attention to vaya, right? La calle. Usa la calle y en el medio no te quedes. Now, this is so important because in the same way you do research about ideology. What do you think we should do with all the Bolivians who are in Cordoba? Should we kick them out and send them to where they came from? That's not a way to do research on ideology. The same happens with variant. You wanted to ask?
Yes, I have a question. Earlier you mentioned dialect leveling and accommodation, so I have two questions about that. First, if dialect leveling only happens, the example you gave was if we are in Queens and there are people of many different backgrounds, so does it involve more than two people, or two people alone, and there can also be that phenomenon?
Accommodation is one-on-one phenomenon, but dialect leveling is what happens to a very heterogeneous population, with people coming to live there, but using different varieties. That has happened, of course you may imagine, that has happened in Poland with all the Ukrainian refugees. Ukrainians from the north, Ukrainians from the south, Crimea, Ukrainians from the Donbass, the east. And they're all living in Warsaw for 3 years and a half already.
And there is the relatively new town of Milton Keynes in the center of England, where some modern high-tech companies settled, and people coming from the north and the south and the east and the west, they moved there to live permanently, so each group coming from different places had so many different features in their pronunciation or grammar that some of those features were level, meaning one grammatical variant of the possible variants of a variable was more frequently chosen. For example,
And you know what? It's interesting to wonder what made people
up for one.
opt for one instead of the others.
And they didn't always opt for the variant of the same group coming from the same place. So there are issues that are to do with the prestige of the user of that particular variant,
Yes.
and some of the cases it's a matter of, or it's to do with a similarity with a feature that the largest group had. It was like the force of number of speaker of that variant won over prestige, but there were all sorts of mixtures. And the dialect of Milton Keynes today is unlike what we could call the original dialect of the people that moved to Milton Keynes. Unlike, meaning different. So it has features of its,
Right.
it has a combination of features that is unique.
And that has happened in Argentina. The various Wichig groups all around, all over in Chaco, Formosa, and the and eastern Salta, the entire thing is called El Gran Chaco. And there were several Wichi dialects, but those groups were picked up and moved into central reservations and settlements. So they had to communicate with people who spoke Wichi, but a different dialect of Wichi. The result was leveling. So the one feature from one feature from another dialect is adopted and diffused and it maintained. The force of prestige is one of the forces that shape the choice.
My grandpa speaks a little bit of Fuji, and he
Can you
was
speak up,
told-
Naya?
Yes. My grandpa speaks a little bit of Fuji, and he was told that little kids were not allowed to speak Fuji outside their houses or any other language that is not Spanish. The same happened with Guarani, for example. Some sons and daughters from immigrants were not allowed to learn the language. For example, my grandma was not allowed to learn the language because of prestige, because they thought that they were going to be criticized by their teachers in school.
That's right. Now notice, the concept of accommodation is a small scale concept for face-to-face interaction. Leveling is what happens to dialects and entire groups. That has happened in the history of Argentina too. Notice that in interwar period, that is between the two world wars, there was a huge wave, another huge immigration wave, and right here in Córdoba, there were Italians from different regions of Italy. So they spoke different dialects. And they had to understand. The pressure was to get the job done. You privilege understanding. Therefore, you don't become sort of nationalistic and say, I call this such and such, and this should be pronounced such and such. You simply go along. Because what matters is the practical side of life. Yes?
No, I just wanted to add to what we're saying about dialect leveling. That I remember reading, I don't know if it was a paper or if it was like a video that I watched, it was about how in Miami there was dialect leveling, and because of all these people speaking Spanish, it's also a city that's in an English-speaking country. They used a variant of Spanish that's not, we don't use as native speakers of Spanish. They would change English words and make them Spanish. And that was something that was seen in Miami because of all this, like we were saying, all these different people from different countries that were living in the same place.
Okay.
Are you there because you need to present some other topic?
Listen, guys. Go to page 43, the paper by Mayer. find a diagram with arrows. Notice that the arrows differ in thickness. How do you interpret that? Thickness. The difference between thickness. Secas. Okay. What about the influence? The strength of the. So what does that mean? As we see, it has a thick arrow, and over here it has a narrower arrow. Do you agree that that is true across all cases? Is that universal? Does that apply to all cases? Rosie, you don't agree? You're not in that.
No, I don't think so. Perhaps a speaker can be directly speaking to an addressee. However, he or she can be bearing in mind an auditor, and perhaps I am telling Aileen something, but I actually want another friend to listen to that, but I don't want to directly say it to her. So perhaps the degrees of thicknesses of the arrow,
The strength of the
the
influence.
strength of the influence is not directly always related to who am I speaking to.
There was a trend, like a TikTok trend a couple of years ago. No, but listen, I have a point. In which parents, when their kids were sleeping, the kids were pretending to be asleep, parents would talk to a friend and say, oh, have you heard that if you put up their hands, they'll continue keeping it up? Because that means that they are asleep, and they continue to push like how much they could do by saying to the friend or to the other person who's there what the kid was supposed to do. So I think that would be a case of what she was saying.
But outside the realm of TikTok, you could also consider how a potential overhearer or your suspicion that there is an eavesdropper. An eavesdropper is a spy. You may think that somebody may be spying on you, so you calibrate your speech under the influence of that idea that you may have. And that can have a greater influence on your speech than your actual addressee.
So, for instance, when I used to work as a medical interpreter, we would have sometimes people that would outsource for the quality. Would that be an overhear or an eavesdropper? Because they could jump in any time, and then at the end of the call, you would know. They will tell you, "Oh, we're just hearing you," and then they will give you feedback.
That would be an overhearer.
Okay.
When they're there, they're an overhearer because they are ratified, they are quote unquote an official member of the participant in the interaction. Okay? And an eavesdropper, a spy, is not ratified. They're not supposed to be there, listening to what you're saying. But a monitor is. Okay? So, people that work on call centers feel this pressure, not just of their addressee, but also of their overhearer, potential overhearer, because they are being evaluated under their
And your
contract.
salary depends on it.
The company may depend on the overhearer's evaluation of their performance.
For example, if I'm speaking on the phone,
Speak up, Naya.
sorry, if I'm speaking on the phone with someone, but not like this, just like this in a video call, and for example, I don't know, Aileen comes into the room and says something to me, but she doesn't know I'm on a call, is that the person on the call is an eavesdropper?
No. Just an overhearer.
Oh,
What is the factor that makes interlocutor a hearer? What is the factor that makes a hearer not supposed to be there? I mean, you said that, for example, over here is supposed to be there, but it's not ratified. But it's not
Right,
official.
exactly. But the eavesdropper, like I said, the eavesdropper is a spy, so you're not.
Ah, it's a spy.
Right, that's why
Ah, yes, yes.
this cross here means I don't know that they are here listening to me. You're not aware of the presence of the eavesdropper.
Like
So, let
phone
alone-
tapping, like tapping a criminal's telephone. So the FBI eavesdrops telephone conversations, while overhearers are all the people on the bus. They are overhearing the conversation you are having with your friend. They can't help it.
I mean,
Cuadrado. There was a different noun.
and your first name?
Yes.
Okay.
If the speaker is not aware that the eavesdropper is listening, how do they affect their speech?
No, I said their idea that there might potentially be one. So it's actually, when you go back to your reading materials, please notice that the author talks about tuning in not to the actual addressee or to their actual auditor, etc., but to the idea that they have about, that's why they use the German term Gestalt. That simply put means your ideas about your addressee, your ideas about what norms your addressee follows, what norms your addressee favors. So speakers tune in to that general reference point that they have, that idea that they have about their addressee. It's not that you actually calibrate to what exactly your addressee favors, but what you think your addressee. Okay? Yeah.
One word about audience design. This concept was proposed by a linguist from New Zealand called Alan Bell. Google him, he's still producing fascinating work. He was the editor of a famous magazine for 20 years, a journal for 20 years called the Journal of Social Linguistics. And after proposing audience design and doing research on that, he proposed a different design. Design como si realmente diseñáramos. We actually don't, but it's a metaphor. No diseñamos nuestra habla, a menos que sea parte de un estrato. Ya que un segundito, que viene la parte más fascinante. Alan Bell observed radio waves. So for those of us who have taken tape recorders with actual cassettes and tapes and recorded people for hours and hours, he had it easy. He simply recorded from the radio. And he found that when the New Zealander who was the anchor of the show knew his, because it was a guy, show was broadcast to Australia, to Indonesia, internationally, the frequency of some features was of a certain kind or height, and when he was on a different show for a local radio station with local patrons, that is, with fans who were from right there. The frequencies of all the features he studied were different. So he said, this is not interactional, because only seldom he invites people in the audience to call in. So this is something else. This is a factor of, that is shaping frequencies. But then he proposed a different concept that was also widely adopted and studied. The referee design, that is, designing speech according to the groups of reference instead of the groups you are addressing. The groups you want to be similar to. Let me ask you a very important question. Under the light of what is on the board, and the importance of audience results, and considering the examples of the interviews, do AAVE speakers display social linguistic variation in their speech? Think about it. Don't rush. Don't rush. And answer it quietly in your own notes. Write yes or no.
Ah no? Gitu juga. Iya. Ano ba?
Another question.
Kakain. căng thẳng là để mấy cái BB là không sợ mấy nào.
An African American teenager from East LA, California. Is interviewed by an African American community insider. Is she likely to make a massive shift towards fewer AAVE features due to
Boleh namahin kepada kita.
the interviewer's gender, another option, the interview situation, we may go add factors, for example, interviewers' age. But this is not a European American interviewer. Oh. Isn't it time for time for the break? Translator's bunch is interested in interpreting. Okay.
Tidak baik.
Take a good look at the graph. No, it's not. Let me read out the text below the graph.
Frequency of jobs for interval classes. Interview
Ready.
Ready, Southern India, Nepal, Northern India.
Okay. So, your name?
Lautaro sir.
Lautaro. What's the social linguistic variable that is under analysis?
There's a lot of stuff.
Oh, Julie. Your name is? Valentin. Viernes. Do you agree with Lautaro? He said that the social linguistic variable is the glottal stop. Glottal stop usually represented with this symbol. It's the sound that you get in, for example, walk up, meaning water.
Yes. Double stops for intervocalic tag.
Right. So what is the social linguistic variable under study?
The glottal stop for intervocalic tag.
Social linguistic. Your answer? Intervocalic t is the verb. As I learned that. Okay, so intervocalic is the variable, the feature that can take alternative realizations. One realization is the glottal stop. So this is one variant of the verb. The other one is t. So the pronunciation walk, water, or walk up. The t between vowels. Okay. Viernes. Valentin, right?
Yes.
Take a good look at the graph. And please tell us what are the factors that this graph shows. The factors that have an influence on the variable. According to this graph.
Age and location. Gender.
Okay. Gender, or rather sex, I agree. Location is a little bit diffuse. Do you mean place of residence of the research subjects?
Yes.
Because location, just like that, could be where the interviews were carried out or anything. So this is place of residence of the research subjects. That's the second fact.
Also, think place of origin and place of residence.
Place of origin and place of residence are not the same. No.
So wouldn't it be place of origin then? Because you can be from Reading and then you're to probably do it in
What we know from the rest of the reading from which I took this is that this is where they live, not necessarily where they were born. Do you understand what MC?
Middle class?
Middle class and working class. So is there an answer?
Yes.
Socioeconomic class. So those three. Why isn't age a factor that has an influence that is revealed by this graph?
Because these are all the same age.
Exactly. All of the research subjects are of the same age group. In order to find out whether age is a factor, then the researcher will compare this age group with another age group, with two more age groups. Okay? So those are the three. What kind of factors are those three? Social demographic factors. And what's the adjective that we use to talk about the variable? Social linguistic. Social linguistic is the variable. Social demographic is one set of factors that affect this variable. Okay. Your name is?
Milagros.
Milagros?
Grasso. Grasso.
Okay. Milagros Grasso. Take a look at the graph once more. Do speakers of the middle class and the working class use the variant huh?
According to the graph, I would say that the members of the working class use that variety
No.
or are likely to use
What is the concept
Variant.
that you use for the option?
a social linguistic variable. Sorry.
No.
No. Pardon.
This is the variable.
Okay, the intervocalic t.
This is the feature that
Thank you.
exhibits two alternatives.
Okay.
What speakers use is
One of the okay.
variant.
The variants. Sorry.
Variant.
Yeah.
So my question was, do speakers of the middle class and the working class use the variant according to the graph?
Yes. They do.
Yes, they do. Then, Milagros, consider the working class, girls and boys. Concentrate on those colors. Which social factor, which of the social factors that we mentioned, which social factor has a stronger influence? Speaker's sex or place of residence? In order to answer that question, you need to compare
Yes.
how big the gaps are.
Place of residence. Then. Or sex.
Okay? Place of residence. Those of you who agree with Milagro, put your hands up.
Can you repeat
Which of the factors has a greater influence on variation? Place of residence or speaker's sex?
place of residence has a bigger gap. If you compare girls and boys from Hall, there's only a 10 point difference. And there's 8 points of difference for weddings. And between the different cities, there's bigger difference. There's like 20, almost 20 points difference.
20 points almost here and 20 points almost.
Yes.
So only Alexia, Milagros, and Julieta agree on that. So those of you who agree with Milagros' initial answer, put your hand up.
I'm not sure though.
Okay, so it seems that Julieta's justification convinced some of you. That's the correct answer, and that's the correct explanation.
Okay.
you need to find which is the factor that affects the variable in such a way that it creates the greatest difference between, in this case, columns or the raw number. Well, actually, these are not raw numbers, these are percentages, percentage of use. Do you understand that?
Sorry.
Does anybody have a question about that?
Yeah, I have one.
What's her name?
Valentina Leichen. Valentina Leichen.
Ah, okay. Valentina
Leichen.
Leichen.
Yeah, I wanted to ask as regards the socioeconomic class.
About socioeconomic class, yeah.
Because there is a huge difference depending on if they belong to the middle class or the working class.
Yeah.
So I thought that was the factor that had greater influence.
Okay, but my question was, I started the question by saying concentrate only on the working class. So then you're not comparing socioeconomic classes. But absolutely, when you see the whole picture, that's totally true. Working class has the strongest influence of these three factors that we talked about.
Can we
and that
use
was-
the word gap instead of the word difference?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part.
Can we use the word gap instead of the word difference? The bigger difference, the bigger gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, despite the fact that social class is obviously the strongest factor, it's so obvious that even I can see it from here. Because some columns are tall and others are short. The influence of the other factors must be interpreted too. Therefore, graphs will contain several indicators for your interpretation, not just what is the strongest influence.
Okay, guys, so that was my next question. So we move on to now a different part of the activity. So please take dictation. I'm going to write a very short question, and you're going to answer it by providing a full, not full, this is complete, but an answer using full sentences with subject and predicate. The question is, what could drive the middle class speakers apostrophe use of the glottal stop at a lower frequency than the working class? What could drive the middle class speakers' use of the glottal stop at a lower frequency than the working class? So, notice that the question is about drive, impulses, motivations, not social demographic factors. So, probably you could go to your reading materials, use one of the first pages in Unit 4 that you studied in Unit 4. The author, in those pages, the author develops a series of drives, motivations, that can explain variations, so you can resort to your reading materials and provide an answer. Talk about their desire to differentiate themselves from the working class, and at the same time, the desire to indicate that they fit in a group with whom they share not just speech behavior, but other features as well. Their socioeconomic standing, probably also their level of education, etc. Do you agree with Valentin Canal's answer?
Yes.
Would you add anything? Would you change anything in his answer?
I was thinking not only that to show that they fit in the middle class, but also position themselves higher or closer to a higher class.
Are you thinking about an aspiration
Yes.
by the middle class? But they are in English towns and cities. The middle class is the highest class, because what comes above the middle class is the royalty.
Right. That's what I'm saying. They have more prestige.
Right.
They aspire. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's very subconscious, but it's like the aspiration to be perceived or higher than they actually are, or to come closer to what is.
I see your point. Normally, that can be observed when the middle class, which is a huge group, is further divided into subgroups. And you get the higher middle class, the middle class, and the lower middle class. Usually it's the second highest group that exhibits a behavior that is described in the reading materials, by the way, and that's called crossover. They usually outperform the highest class. And that indicates this aspiration to be like the topmost social class. Okay? But here we have only middle class as a large bulk compared to the working class. So that doesn't actually apply to this case, but it could be a possible explanation in one case. Valentina Claudia, Valentin Canals.
And Valentina Rossi.
And Valentina Rossi.
Claudia is not
We were, when we were talking about it, we were wondering because we thought on the one hand, this idea of aligning the community, right, the middle class first, aligning with the value that the standard enunciation represents, and also the idea of differentiating from another community of speakers. And we felt that they were sort of like intra-feeding each other.
Of course, because there is no one single correct answer to this question. Because there are many, or in fact, there are usually multiple motivations that coexist and that move speakers to using metaphor within the I didn't ask a question about the working class, but you could also consider that the working class are using a variant more frequently than the other, a variant that they as a group value even if the whole community or the entire region or the entire country exhibits a different preference.
Would it be a valid answer then to say that it's both to align themselves with the values that they believe are represented through this feature, and also to distinguish from another?
But we're not talking about values in the sense of social values or cultural values or moral values.
Okay.
This is the social value, positive social value that one variant has, in the sense that that variant is appreciated in a, and this is something we're going to discuss next class, in a metaphorical market, or actually it's a symbolic market in which linguistic features are highly appreciated or less so. Just like any other objects or goods are in a different market, in the market of materials. Okay?
One
So,
way of expressing that could be that a certain feature is positively evaluated. So you don't need to use the term value.
Okay.
Positively evaluated. Actually, what kind of evaluation are we talking about? Social evaluation. The social evaluation of social linguistic variables. And that, of course, goes beyond an objective analysis of the phonology of the community. We have said here that for many Gorgoists, the S's are not a focus of sensitivity, but the year is. So, saying, yo te amo, yo is the object of negative social evaluation. And of course, because social evaluation emerges in groups and communities, we cannot extend that negative social evaluation to the entire Argentina. Because you go to Cuyo and you hear the yeah in